Yes, thank you. Thank you. Boy, so this is what they call the pit. This is what they call the pit. How about that? I'm glad I'm not an opposing basketball team right now. Wow. Eugene, it is good to be here. It's good to be in Oregon. I love you back. There are a few thank yous that I've got to make. First of all, please give it up for the president of University of Oregon, Dave Frohnmeyer. Thank you. I want to thank a great supporter, Congressman Earl Blumauer of the 3rd Congressional District. I want to thank Susan Castillo, our State Superintendent of Public Instruction. I want to thank the Lane and University of Oregon Students for Obama groups. I want to thank Eugene for Obama. My 2 local organizers, Courtney Height and Jonathan Manton. Give it up for them. And I want to thank one of my national co-chairs, an outstanding leader here in America, somebody who has devoted his life to public service. It helps that he looks and sounds like Clint Eastwood. He was a fighter pilot, a Top Gun, flew in the Thunderbirds, flew in Vietnam, and then ultimately became a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is homegrown here in Oregon, and I am so grateful to have his support and his friendship. Please give a big round of applause to General Tony McPeak. All right, Ducks, I know that this was a tough night for you. But I tell you what, Illinois didn't even make the NCAAs this year. So you guys had a wonderful season. You're going to have an even better season next year. In the meantime, let's talk a little politics. Let's talk a little politics in the meantime. I announced I was running for president 15 months ago. I stood on the steps of the old state capitol in Springfield, Illinois. The building where Abraham Lincoln served for most of his career before he went to Washington. Lincoln is the man. I agree with that. Let's give it up for Abraham Lincoln. Why not? Why not? Love that guy. Love that guy. The city where I served for many years in state government before I joined the United States Senate. I stood on these steps and I announced this unlikely journey to change America. And I have to say, after the announcement, there were those who came up to me and said, you know, why are you running this time? You're a relatively young man. You can afford to wait. And I had to explain I'm not running because of some long-held ambitions. I'm not running because I think it's somehow owed to me. I'm running because of what Dr. King called the fierce urgency of now. The fierce urgency of now. Because I believe there's such a thing as being too late. And that hour is almost upon us. We marked this week the 5th anniversary of the war in Iraq. At the outset, we were promised a 6-month venture. We would be greeted as liberators. Cost us about $50 to $60 billion. 5 years later, after the price tag has gone well beyond $500 billion, and people expect that it may reach as much as $3 trillion. After thousands of lives lost and thousands more grievously wounded. A war that has made us less safe. A war that has fanned anti-American sentiment. A war that has distracted us from the battle we need to fight against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. We are at a defining moment. Our economy is in a shambles. Everywhere you go, all throughout Oregon, all across America, you hear the same stories. People's wages and incomes haven't gone up in years. It's harder to save, it's harder to retire. People have never paid more for gas at the pump, never paid more for a college education, never paid more for health care. 47 million people without health insurance, and if you've got health insurance, what's happened? You've seen your co-payments and your deductibles and your premiums going up and up and up. Our education system, despite the slogans, leaves millions of children behind, unable to compete in a global economy. And now with the subprime lending crisis and the financial institutions on Wall Street teetering, people are at risk of losing their homes. They're at risk of losing their jobs. They're anxious about the futures of their children and their grandchildren. In such circumstances, we can't afford to wait. We can't wait to fix our schools. We cannot wait to fix our healthcare system. We cannot wait to bring back good jobs and good wages to America. We can't wait to end global warming. We cannot wait to bring an end to this disastrous war in Iraq. We cannot wait. That's why I'm running for President of the United States of America. I love you back. I do. When we decided to run, it was based on the belief that the size of our challenges had outstripped the capacity of a broken and divided politics to solve. And that the American people were hungry for something different. They were tired of a politics that was all about tearing each other down. They wanted a politics that was about lifting the country up. They were tired of spin and PR and double talk. They wanted straight talk and the truth out of their leaders. In other words, I was betting on you, the American people. I knew that I was not the most conventional of presidential candidates. But I also understood that what had taken me to Chicago over 2 decades ago, when I worked as a community organizer alongside steel workers who had been laid off after the plants closed and were shipped overseas. And I spent 3.5 years setting up job training programs for the unemployed and after-school programs for disadvantaged youth and bringing economic development to these neighborhoods. And it was the best education I ever had, as hard as the work was, because it taught me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they're given a chance. That change in America doesn't happen from the top down. It happens from the bottom up. And so what I was convinced of was that we are a generous and a decent people, willing to work hard and sacrifice for future generations. And if we could just come together, if we could get past the divisions and the distractions and the trivialization of politics, if we could decide, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, young, old, rich, poor, that we were going to challenge the special interests and the fat cats that have come to dominate Washington, and that we were willing to challenge ourselves to be better neighbors and better parents and better citizens, then there would be no problem we could not solve. There would be no destiny we could not fulfill. That was the bet I was making on you. And I am here to report that after traveling through 46 states, after speaking to hundreds of thousands of people and shaking hundreds of thousands of hands, after kissing hundreds of babies and eating hundreds of chicken dinners, I am here to report that my bet has paid off. My faith has been vindicated, because all across the country, Americans are standing up and they're saying, we want something new. We are ready to turn the page. We are ready to write a new chapter in American history. That's why I'm running for President of the United States of America. Now, as I watch young people get involved like never before, as I see those who are young at heart, rediscovering the excitement of change, I would like to take all the credit. But I have to confess that part of the reason everybody's so enthusiastic in this election, why they're watching the debates and reading position papers and turning out at rallies and voting at record numbers, part of the reason is they know that no matter what else happens, when they go in that polling place next November to choose the next president of the United States, the name George W. Bush will not be on the ballot. No Bush. No Bush. The name of my cousin, Dick Cheney, will not be on the ballot. Some of you read about this. This was a crisis in the campaign when the report came out that Cheney and I were distant relations. That's okay, though. His name won't be on the ballot, so we know that the era of Katrina and warrantless wiretaps, of Scooter Libby justice and Brownie incompetence and Karl Rove politics, those days are coming to an end next year. But, but you know what? You're not here just to be against something. You know, you're here to be for something. You know, it's easy to be against stuff. It's easy to complain. It's easy to feel cynical. It's easy to feel bitter. What's hard is to make a decision that we still have it in our capacity to join together and make this country work. And work not just for a few, but work for the many. Not just for the top, but the middle and the bottom. That we can still create ladders of opportunity for all people and make sure that upward mobility is not just a myth, but is a reality, and that our middle class is strong and prosperous, and that we are thinking about the next generation, and we are good stewards of the environment, and we are good partners in alliances for peace and prosperity beyond our borders. That's why you're here. Because you can imagine something better than we've got right now. But it's not easy. It's not easy. We've got to work for it. We've got to work for it. There's a reason why people feel cynical, because they feel like their voices have not been heard for so long. They're not heard on Wall Street. They're not heard in Washington. I hear them because I'm traveling across the country. I'm talking to people. And I meet, you know, the young woman I met who has a sick sister. Her sister has cerebral palsy. She's got to support her sister. So she's going to school full-time, full course load. She is determined to get her degree. She goes to school, comes home, takes care of her sister, does her homework, gets to bed at 10. Then she wakes up at 1 o'clock in the morning and starts out on the night shift, working for FedEx, taking packages out to airplanes. She gets 3 hours of sleep a night. She's not looking for a handout. She is determined to live out her American dream, but she doesn't understand why it is that Washington seems deaf to her asking for a little bit of help. A little help on her student loans, a little bit of help taking care of her sister. Her voice is not heard. The voice of the worker who has worked 20 years in a plant, suddenly it gets shipped overseas and he loses not just his job, but his pension and his health care. He wants to be heard. He wants to feel like somebody's not giving him a handout, but giving him a hand up. Working to knock down some of those barriers so that he can succeed, live out his American dream. The veteran who I meet from Iraq or Afghanistan who's proud of his service, and rightfully so, because our veterans have performed magnificently. They have done everything that has been asked of them. They have performed brilliantly on behalf of this nation. But he or she thinks about the buddies that they left behind back in Iraq. Some of them may be homeless or disabled, don't understand how this country could have forgotten their service. Sometimes I don't meet them, I meet the mothers in rope lines after an event like this, and they'll hug me and put their head on my shoulder and start crying silently over the memory of a fallen son. That's how I got this bracelet. Mother of a 20-year-old dying in a roadside bomb, asking me to make sure that no other mothers experienced what she experienced. You know, those voices are not being heard in Washington. The banks, they're being heard. The insurance companies, they're heard. The drug companies, people are listening to them. They shape the agenda, they dictate the legislation. They make the big campaign contributions. And so there's a sense that in our economy and in our politics that a smaller and smaller circle of power is working on their own behalf, and ordinary Americans are being forgotten. And that's why this election is so important, because that's not how America's supposed to work. That's not what our democracy is all about. That's not what the founders envisioned when they said a government that was of and by and for the people. And so this is our opportunity in this election right here in Oregon to make our voices heard once and for all. You know, because the status quo may resist, but I tell you what, if you are ready for change, if you're determined that you want a different kind of America, then we can go ahead and tell the lobbyists and the special interests that their days of setting the agenda are over, because they have not funded my campaign, they will not run my White House, and they will not drown out the voices of the American people when I'm President of the United States of America. If you're willing to stand alongside me and fight for change, then we can stop talking about the healthcare crisis and start doing something about it. I've put forward a plan that says if you have healthcare, we're going to work with your employers to lower your premiums by $2,500 a year. If you don't have healthcare, you can buy into a healthcare plan that is just as good as the healthcare I have as a member of Congress. You can't be excluded for pre-existing conditions. We will negotiate for the cheapest available price on drugs for our seniors. We will emphasize prevention so we have a health care system and not a disease care system. And we don't have to wait 20 years from now to do it or 10 years from now to do it. We will do it by the end of my first term as President of the United States of America. We can restore a sense of fairness to our economy. Now understand this, I believe in capitalism, I believe in the free market, I believe in entrepreneurship, I believe in opportunity, I believe in people working hard to grab their piece of the American dream. That's what I believe in, but I also know that when a CEO is making more in 10 minutes than ordinary workers are making in an entire year, and the CEO is getting the tax break, and the worker's getting nothing. And if the company goes belly up, the CEO gets a golden parachute, and the worker loses his pension, that something is wrong, something is amiss. We've got to change that system and make it work for every American. Just like our politics works best, not from the top down, but from the bottom up, our economy works best when it's working for all people, not just some. So we're going to go ahead and take away tax breaks from companies that ship jobs overseas, and we're going to invest in companies that are investing in creating jobs right here in the United States of America. We're going to make sure that our trade agreements have strong labor standards and environmental standards. I believe in trade, but I also believe in forcing trade agreements that are good for American workers and good for workers across the world, where they're not being exploited, where we don't have child labor, where we don't have forced labor because unions can't organize. I want to make sure that our economy invests in infrastructure, in roads and bridges and broadband lines here in the United States, and invests in the kind of energy plans that will free ourselves from dependence on foreign oil and invest in solar and wind and biodiesel. I want to cap greenhouse gases and create a Manhattan Project for clean energy in this country. To put people back to work, millions of people can work in that sector if we've got a sense of imagination about our economy. And it'll help to make those investments if we're not spending $12 or $10 billion a month in Iraq, because that's money we could spend right here in the United States of America. And that will make us safer. That will make us more secure. I want to create schools and an education system that is the best in the world from the moment a child is born to the moment that child graduates from college. And we can do it. What's missing is not that we don't know how to improve our schools. What's missing is a sense of urgency about it. We think that, well, you know, that black kid over there, that kid can't learn. That Hispanic kid in the barrio, you know, that's an immigrant's kid. That's not our problem. That poor kid in Appalachia, rural Oregon, you know, that's dropping out of school. Well, you know, life is tough. You know, we have this sense that somehow those are those kids, somebody else's problem. But they're not those kids, those are our kids. Every child in America is our child. Every child deserves opportunity. Every child deserves somebody to care about them. That's what America stands for. And so we're going to invest in early childhood education. We're going to invest in early childhood education so that we close the achievement gap, make sure every child is prepared when they go to school. And then we're going to not just talk about how great teachers are, we're going to reward teachers for their greatness by giving them higher salaries, giving them more support. And, you know, we have to have the highest standards in the world, especially in math and science. So I want high standards in our schools. We've got to compete against kids in China and India and Eastern Europe, all of who've joined this global economy. But I don't want high standards measured just by a single high-stakes standardized test. I don't want our teachers teaching to the test, because I want our students learning art and music and science and poetry and literature and history and civics, all the things that help create not just competitive workers, but good citizens in America. That's the kind of education I want to provide. And I don't know about you, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's about time we made sure that every young person in America can afford to go to college. That doesn't seem like an unreasonable idea. So we're going to give a $4,000 tuition credit, every student every year. But young people, you are not going to get off scot-free. You're going to have to spend some time in community service, work in a homeless shelter, work in a veterans home, join the Peace Corps. We will invest in you. You will invest in America. Together, we will march this country forward when I'm President of the United States. I want a government that works, a government that's competent. No more heads of FEMA who headed up the Arabian Horses Association. I want somebody who actually understands emergency management. No more heads of the Department of Labor that don't believe in labor. I'm going to have a head of an environmental protection agency that actually wants to protect the environment, the forests, the salmon, the streams, the rivers, the oceans, the skies, right here in Oregon, all across America. That's what the agency is for, protecting the environment. That's why it's called the Environmental Protection Agency. I want a government that believes in reason and believes in fact and believes in science, that understands the compelling need to invest in stem cell research, to double our research in basic science, to invest in new technologies that will create the jobs of the future. All right. And I want a government that implements a foreign policy that reflects the decency and the wisdom of the American people. You know, General McPeak talked about being commander-in-chief. And as your commander-in-chief, my job will be to keep you safe. That will be my first priority. And I will do what's required to keep you safe and to keep my 9-year-old and 6-year-old daughters safe. I won't hesitate to strike against those who would do us harm. But keeping you safe starts with maintaining the finest military in the world, and that means training our troops properly, and it means equipping them properly. It means putting them on the proper rotation so that they're not going on 3 or 4 or 5 tours of duty. It means caring for our troops when they come home. No more homeless veterans, no more begging for disability payments, no more waiting for hours to see a doctor at the VA. They have earned our respect and our honor. We have to serve them as well as they've served us. But it also means using our military wisely. That's the essence of being commander-in-chief. That's what General McPeak was talking about: judgment, wisdom, well, the honesty. When that 3 a.m. call comes, what you want is somebody who will get all the information, who will analyze it not through an ideological lens, but analyze it based on practicality and common sense, and weigh the dangers and weigh the costs and weigh the opportunities, and will listen to advisors and will be straight with the American people about the choices that we face. That's the answer you want from the commander-in-chief if they get a phone call. Not fear-mongering, not trying to act tough because that's the politically smart thing to do, because it's the troops who end up having to pay the cost. It's the American people who end up having to pay the cost. Using our military wisely, there's no more profound obligation of the commander-in-chief. And the war in Iraq was unwise. We have 3 candidates left for the presidency of the United States. One of them recognized this was a bad idea. That's who you want answering the phone call at 3 a.m. in the morning. The war The war in Iraq was unwise, and I was opposed to it in 2002. I will bring it to an end in 2009. And don't be fooled by the argument of a precipitous drawdown. Nobody's being precipitous. We have talked about bringing troops out at a pace of 1 to 2 brigades per month. At that pace, it would take us 16 months to get our combat troops out. That is potentially 2 years from now. That is not precipitous. This war has lasted longer than World War I, World War II, and the Civil War. 2 years from now, it will have been 7 years. If we cannot stabilize Iraq in 7 years, we will not be able to stabilize it in 15 years. We will not be able to stabilize it in 21 years. We won't be able to stabilize it in the 100 years that John McCain is talking about. But if we send a signal, we're not going to be an occupying force. If we remove our troops carefully, as careful getting out as we were careless getting in, if we initiate the humanitarian aid that the Iraqis so desperately need, ordinary Iraqis, if we set a timetable to force action among the Iraqi factions, if we are initiating diplomacy, not just among our friends like Saudi Arabia and Jordan, but also Iran and Syria, we can then refocus our attention on going after those who killed 3,000 Americans, bin Laden and his cohorts who have a safe haven right now in the hills between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We can start putting our troops on decent rotations. We can take some of that money and invest here in the United States of America to build a strong economy that will ultimately make us safer and deal with the homeland security needs that have been neglected over the last 7 years. And we will be able to go before the world community and say, America's back. America's back. America's back with diplomacy. You know, we have 3 candidates left running for president. One of them has said he will meet not just with our friends, but with our enemies. Not just with leaders he likes, but leaders we don't. John McCain didn't say that. Hillary Clinton won't do it. George Bush mocks it. But I remember what John F. Kennedy once said. He said, we should never negotiate out of fear, but we should never fear to negotiate. That's what strong countries and strong presidents do. They talk to their adversaries. They tell them where America stands. They try to resolve differences without resort to war. Nixon met with Mao. Kennedy met with Khrushchev. Reagan met with Gorbachev. That's what American foreign policy is. We use our military when we have to, but we also understand the power of diplomacy. And when we do that, the world will once again look to us for leadership. Leadership in locking down loose nuclear weapons. Leadership in helping poor countries build schools and dig wells and deal with HIV/AIDS. Leadership that brings an end to the genocide in Darfur. Leadership that restores our sense of due process and human rights and civil rights. We will close Guantanamo and restore habeas corpus and end renditions. Because you will have a president who has taught the Constitution and believes in the Constitution and will obey the Constitution of the United States of America when I'm president. That's the vision of what is possible. That is the America that we should be building right now. But, you know, remember what I said, it's not going to be easy. When I started this campaign, we knew that the status quo would resist. It always does. Not just Republicans, the status quo within the Democratic Party. We get comfortable too. We start getting those contributions from the lobbyists and the special interests. We start liking our positions of power. We start getting lazy. We stop listening. We become more distant from those we claim to represent. It happens periodically in the history of this country. And then our citizenry, we become divided. We become distracted. And we've seen that happen for so long now that we just think that's normal, that that's what politics is about. I gave a speech this week about race because of some excusable, because of and it was prompted by an immediate controversy and firestorm of my former pastor who had said some inexcusable things, and I found out about them during the course of this campaign and then during the last couple of weeks, and I condemned them strongly. But what I wanted to do in that speech is explain that this is just one more way that we're distracted. This is one more way we're divided. This is one more reason why we can't come together to solve big problems in this country. But it's not the only division we have. We're distracted by all kinds of stuff. We're distracted by all kinds of things. We're distracted by an immigration debate that's more about politics than solving the problem. We're distracted by, we're distracted by arguments about gays as if that was the source of our economic dilemmas or our national security problems. We're distracted by the trivial back and forth and the petty bickering among our politicians. We're distracted in so many ways. And what I tried to talk about this week is we're all a little guilty of it. I feel myself slipping into it sometimes. But that's not how we're going to move this country forward. We are going to move this country forward because we recognize ourselves in each other. Because we decide for all our differences, we have more in common. Because we know that every American loves their country and believes in opportunity and wants a fair shake. If they're working hard, they want to get paid a living wage, and they want health care for their family so they're not bankrupt if they get sick, and they want to send their kids to a good school even if they're not rich, and they want to retire with dignity and respect, and they want to be safe from harm, and they want an environment that we can pass on to the next generation. That's what so many of us want. That's what is at stake in this election, and so we can't afford to be distracted this time. Not this time. This time it's going to be different. This time we're standing up and insisting that change is possible. This time we are going to put aside fear and we are going to reach out for hope. This time we are going to turn out like never before, and we're going to vote at record numbers. This time, we won't be turned back by racial division. We won't be turned back by social hot-button issues. This time, we are going to stay focused on creating the kind of America that we want for our children and our grandchildren. And if you are willing to stand with me, if you're willing to hope with me, if you're willing to struggle and fight for me, then I promise you this, Eugene, we will not just win Oregon. We will win this nomination. We will win the general election. And then you and I together, we are going to change this country, and we are going to change the world. God bless you. God bless America. Thank you.